ship disappeared during a blizzard in the Arctic. No wreckage, no debris, no oil trail bleeding through the ice, just gone. And then 3 days later, someone found it floating perfectly upright, 45 miles away, with nobody on board. That was 1931. The last time anyone saw it was 1969. Nobody has ever explained what happened in between. Not the engineers, not the naval architects, not the Alaskan government, which launched a formal investigation in 2006 and concluded, after pulling together 4 decades of documented sightings, that the ship's whereabouts were simply unknown. A 1,300-ton steel vessel, the length of nearly 3 basketball courts laid end to end, and the official answer is a shrug. That alone should keep you here. The Baychimo wasn't a vessel with a romantic story. It wasn't a warship or an explorer's yacht or some billionaire's vanity project. It was a cargo ship. Workmanlike, unglamorous, built in Hamburg in 1914 to haul freight and do it quietly. After the First World War, it passed to British ownership as part of war reparations and eventually landed with the Hudson's Bay Company, one of the oldest and most ruthless commercial operations in North American history. Their business in the Arctic was simple: collect fur, muskrat pelts, Arctic fox, wolverine, seal skins loaded from remote indigenous trading posts scattered across coastlines where the wind never fully stops. The Baychimo ran that route for years. Nobody wrote poems about it. Nobody cared. It was a truck with a hull. By September 1931, Captain John Cornwell had made the Arctic run more than a dozen times. He knew the window between navigable water and total freeze-up. He knew how fast it could close. That year it closed like a fist. The Baychimo was fully loaded, furs worth the modern equivalent of several $1 million packed into the hold, when the ice came in ahead of schedule and didn't stop. Within days, the ship wasn't just stuck. It was encased. Pack ice several feet thick, pressing against every inch of steel from every direction simultaneously. The hull groaned under the pressure, the way a building sounds right before something structural gives. Cornwell made the call most captains dread making. He stopped trying to fight it. 15 crew members were airlifted out by a passing aircraft. The rest, including Cornwell, set up camp on the frozen sea itself. They built a wooden shelter directly on the ice, maybe 100 yards from the trapped ship, and they waited. -20, -25. The ice expanding silently outward in every direction like the Arctic was slowly eating the horizon. 2 weeks passed. The ship didn't move. The men ran low on patience but stayed. And then October 24th arrived. The blizzard that hit the Beaufort Sea that week wasn't a storm. It was an erasure. Winds at 70 miles per hour, temperatures crashing toward -40, visibility dropping to 0 within minutes of the first gust. The men sealed themselves inside their wooden camp and stopped being able to hear each other speak over the noise. For 4 days, the world outside simply did not exist. There was only the shrieking and the cold and the waiting. When it finally broke and they dug themselves out and looked toward where the Baychimo had been sitting for 2 weeks, there was nothing there. Not a mast tip above the ice, not a shadow under it. A dark, open channel where the hull had been already beginning to refreeze, and nothing else. Cornwell assumed what any rational person would assume. The storm had done what Arctic storms do. The ice pressure had finally cracked the hull, the sea had poured in, and 1,322 tons of steel had gone to the bottom. He filed a mental note about total loss and started thinking about how to get his men home. Then a group of Inuit hunters traveling by dog sled sent word that changed everything. They had spotted a ship, floating freely in open water, 45 miles southwest of where the Baychimo had been locked in ice. No visible damage severe enough to explain why it was drifting unmanned, just sitting there on the Beaufort Sea in late November like it had somewhere to be and hadn't decided where yet. Cornwell got to it. He climbed aboard. The hull was intact. The superstructure was battered and scarred. But the ship was fundamentally, impossibly, still a ship. The cargo of furs was still in the hold. A vessel that should have been shredded by the same pack ice that traps and crushes submarines had instead been driven 45 miles through an Arctic blizzard and arrived on the other side floating. He salvaged what he could, took the most valuable cargo, and then, in a decision that history has never quite forgiven him for, he left it. Another storm was coming. The ship was too damaged to safely sail south, he decided. The risk to any crew was too high. The Baychimo was abandoned. That was November 1931. What followed was something that doesn't fit inside the way we expect the physical world to behave. March of 1933. A trapper named Leslie Melvin is working the Alaskan coastline and comes across an unmanned ship drifting in the Beaufort Sea. He boards it. The ship has been alone in the Arctic for over a year. Through 2 full winters, through storms that had been dismantling everything else they touched, the hull is weathered. The interior is cold and silent and strange, but it's floating. It's the Baychimo. Melvin makes a note, tells people what he found, and the ship drifts north again and disappears back into the ice. The Inuit communities along that coastline stopped treating the Baychimo as a salvage opportunity and started treating it as something the Arctic had claimed for its own purposes, not supernatural. These were practical people living practical lives in an environment that killed you if you got sentimental about things. But something beyond the expected rules. A ship the ice kept instead of crushing. That distinction mattered to them in a way it probably wouldn't matter to most people who'd only seen the Arctic in photographs. Without anyone running the bilge pumps, water ingress becomes catastrophic within months, sometimes weeks. There is no engineering model that produces a ship surviving 38 years of that unattended. The math simply doesn't work. And yet the last documented sighting was 1969, when Alaska natives encountered the Baychimo frozen in pack ice near Icy Cape. The ship was 55 years old. It had been without a crew for 38 of them. After that, silence. They gathered every documented sighting, every logged coordinate, every first-hand account across nearly 4 decades. They mapped the drift patterns against known Arctic current data and tried to calculate where a hull last seen near Icy Cape would most likely have ended up. They found nothing. No wreck on any seafloor their survey reached, no fragments washed onto any coastline, no debris consistent with a ship that size anywhere in the corridor the Baychimo was known to have traveled. The formal conclusion, written into the official record, used 2 words: whereabouts unknown. Here's the thing about that phrase that I want you to sit with for a second. Whereabouts unknown. For a 1,300-ton steel ship, in one of the most closely monitored coastlines in North America, surveilled specifically because drifting ice hazards and submerged wrecks are a genuine threat to modern shipping. The agencies that monitor that water were looking for exactly what the Baychimo would have become. And they found nothing. Not a rivet, not a hull plate, not a shadow on a sonar screen. The Beaufort Sea is deep. Parts of it drop past 1,500 meters. A hull that finally surrendered in deep water during a storm, far from any coastline, sinks fast and leaves almost nothing the ice doesn't take. That's probably what happened. At some point between 1969 and now, the ship that had no right to survive finally stopped. The math that had been defying itself for 38 years finally resolved. And whatever went down completely. In cold water dark enough that it hasn't mattered to anyone except the occasional historian trying to close a file. We don't actually know why the Baychimo survived as long as it did. We have theories about hull geometry and current patterns and statistical luck, but we don't have an answer. The thing just kept going, through conditions that ended everything else around it for reasons that don't reduce neatly into an explanation you can write on a whiteboard. And at some point it stopped, alone, somewhere in water so cold and deep and dark that it took every trace of itself with it. There's something in that story that doesn't feel like it's just about a ship. It feels like it's about the thing that keeps moving when every reasonable expectation says it should have stopped, and how even that thing, eventually, quietly, in a place where no one is watching, finally goes still.